In this section, we'll identify the key topics from the PMI or PMBOK framework that you must be familiar with to pass the Project Management Professional Certification exam. In the next section, we will review the details of each of the project management process groups to ensure you understand the concepts, processes, and tools and techniques that are covered for the certification. The first topic is the project management framework itself. You should spend at least 1 hour reviewing the Simply Learn Lessons 2. You must understand the concept of a project and project management, the difference between projects, programs, and portfolios, the purpose of a PMO, and different types of organization structures. It is also important to understand the differences between project and product life cycles, and to understand the different types of project life cycles. Next, you should ensure you understand the project management processes groups described in Lessons 3. You should understand the purpose of each process group, including how they support one another. There are 5 process groups: initiating, planning, executing, monitoring and controlling, and closing. We will review the inputs and key activities of each process group and learn how these enable the effective delivery of a project. We will also review the 10 project management knowledge areas and see how these enable the processes within each of the process groups. These knowledge areas will be the basis for your exam preparation in the course content, so it will be important to be familiar with each area. There are 10 knowledge areas covered within the PMP exam. These consist of integration management, scope management, time management, cost management, quality management, human resource management, communication management, risk management, procurement management, and stakeholder management. Each knowledge area within the PMP certification is composed of a number of project management processes. There are a total of 47 project management processes, and each one is reviewed in detail in the course content. It is important to remember that every process contains inputs, tools and techniques, and outputs. It is helpful to remember the acronym ITO when thinking of each of the project management processes. The 47 processes are grouped into the 5 process groups mentioned above. The knowledge areas provide another view of related processes that cut across each of the 5 process groups. It is important to remember this relationship between processes and the knowledge areas and process groups. In terms of preparation time, the key to passing the PMP certification exam is not the specific amount of time spent on each topic, but rather spending enough time for you to feel that you fully understand the key concepts, including PMP terminology, key processes, roles, functions, and ultimately how the PMBOK allows project managers to deliver value to the customer. Preparation time can be spent by reviewing the PMBOK content, but also by picking a knowledge area and reviewing its purpose, inputs, outputs, and tools and techniques. If you're able to speak to these, you'll have internalized the subject matter sufficiently and can proceed to writing the exam. In terms of time management during the exam, identify the questions that speak to the life cycle stages and key PMBOK processes that you are most familiar with. For example, questions related to project cost management, time management, and risk management. Depending on your personal style, you may want to answer these questions first or leave them for the end. Either way, you should be able to identify the answers to these questions quickly and with minimal thought. Questions relating to the areas you are less familiar with can then have some additional time allocated, so you can carefully review the questions and use process of elimination, logic, and your understanding of PMBOK's purposes to select the best answers. One of the more challenging aspects of the PMP for many exam participants is the many formulas and terms that are contained in the PMBOK. To assist you with this reviewing and memorizing these terms, Simply Learn has developed the Brain Dump for PMP Preparation Guide. This guide contains all of the important formulas and reference terms that you should be familiar with before taking the exam. Make sure you spend as much time as required to memorize these terms so you can apply them during the exam. Before we look into the details of the 5 process groups, it's important to understand the PMP certification exam itself. This is described in detail in Simply Learn's Lesson 1. The exam is 4 hours in duration and consists of 200 multiple choice questions. Each question is comprised of 4 answers and only 1 is correct. You get 1 point for every correct answer, and there are no penalties for wrong answers. So it's important to answer every question on the exam. The PMI does not specify a specific pass threshold for the exam. However, you will receive a grade of below proficient, moderately proficient, or proficient for each process group at the completion of your exam. On the exam, there will also be 25 questions that are considered pre-test and are included to help the PMI prepare questions for future exams. These questions are not included in your grade. However, it is not possible to identify these questions on the exam. As a result, it is important to answer every question to the best of your ability. The PMI will want to ensure that you have a solid understanding of important terms like projects and project management. An example question would look like, which of the following is not a characteristic of a project? A collection of interrelated activities. B, a temporary endeavor. C, an activity that repeats every week and lasts for more than a day. Or D, a set of activities with a definite beginning and end. The correct answer is C. Don't let yourself get tricked because the answer seems too obvious. Remember, when the project fails, it's the project manager's fault. If the project succeeds, it's the team's success. Now let's take a closer look at each of the 5 process groups covered in the exam. The first process group we will cover is the initiating process group. Prepare for approximately 1 hour reviewing the initiating process group and understanding the inputs, tools and techniques, and outputs of its processes. The PMP exam will have 26 questions, or 13%, on the initiating group. There are 2 processes within the initiating process group. 1, develop project charter, and 2, identify stakeholders. During initiation, the project is conceived and authorized to proceed. Within the initiating processes, the project scope is defined, financial resources committed, stakeholders identified, and the project manager assigned. An important output from initiation is the project charter, which is an output of the develop project charter process. The key purpose of this process group is to align the stakeholders' expectations with the project's purpose and establish the vision of the project or what the project needs to accomplish. In addition to the project charter, the stakeholder register is an important output from this process group, as it will be used to drive requirements, communication, and validation necessary for the project. As you review each of the process groups and their supporting knowledge areas and processes, it's important to understand 2 inputs that are often referenced for many of the processes: organizational process assets and enterprise environmental factors. These were both covered in Chapter 2 of the PMBOK. Organization process assets are the plans, processes, policies, procedures, and knowledge bases specific for the project organization. These assets are grouped into 2 categories: processes and procedures, and corporate knowledge base. Leveraging these assets helps the project conform to organizational governance requirements and also speeds up the delivery process by using templates and previous project examples. Enterprise environmental factors refer to conditions not under the control of the project team, but that influence, constrain, or direct the project. These factors can vary widely in nature and type, but some examples include the culture of organization, geographical distribution of facilities and resources, government or industry standards, market conditions, political climate, etc. Let's look at some potential questions on what might be asked. Question 1. Which of the following is a source of information about specific project constraints and assumptions based on the current environment, historical record, and expert judgment? A, project charter. B, communication management plan. C, risk management plan. Or D, project scope management plan. The answer is A, project charter. The project charter is critical to a project's success and identifies constraints, assumptions, and high-level risks that are all listed in the project charter. Question 2. Which of the following is not normally an element of the project charter? A, the product description or a reference to this document. B, the business need that the project was undertaken to address. C, work package descriptions. Or D, the formal authorization to apply organizational resources to project activities. The answer is C. Of all the options listed, option C, work package descriptions, is not an element of a project charter. This would be developed during the planning phase group and is an element of the work breakdown structure, or WBS. Now let's review the next process group area. Prepare for approximately 2 hours by reviewing the knowledge areas listed on page 61 of the PMBOK under Planning Process Group. As might be expected, the Planning Group is the largest process group covered within the PMBOK, and it contains processes from all 10 knowledge areas. Planning processes are performed to establish the total scope of the project, define the approach to achieve the scope, and to define the objectives required for the scope. 24% of the questions asked on the PMP certification exam will be based on the planning process group. The important deliverable from the planning process group are the planning documents created for each of the 10 knowledge areas. The outputs from the processes within the group include the plans for managing the project management plan itself, as well as the scope management plan, the schedule management plan, the cost management plan, the quality management plan, the human resource management plan, communications plan, risk management plan, procurement management plan, and stakeholder management plan. With larger projects, it might be necessary to use repeated feedback loops for additional analysis of these plans. In PMP terms, this approach is called progressive elaboration, and the plans become more detailed and refined over time. The planning process groups delineates the strategy and tactics for the project and defines the course of action to successfully deliver the project. One important benefit is that a well-managed planning process makes stakeholder engagement and buy-in much easier. To enable this buy-in, it's important to solicit input from all stakeholders when developing project planning documents. Remember, project stakeholder management is one of the new knowledge areas introduced with the PMBOK version 5 release. Make sure you spend time on reviewing the plan stakeholder management process if you have previously studied earlier versions of the PMBOK. When developing a project plan, it's important to understand the risks that might affect the project. Risks are any uncertain events that have not yet occurred and could affect the project. either negatively or positively. Risks that have occurred become issues. When calculating risks, the risk weighting is determined by the risk probability and the risk impact. Probability is the likelihood of a risk occurring, and impact is the effect of that risk occurring. Techniques expected monetary value, or EVM analysis, using a decision tree diagram, which are described on page 339 of the PMBOK and lesson 11 of your Simply Learn training. Also remember that there are several strategies for responding to negative risks: avoid, transfer, mitigate, or accept. Risk avoidance involves eliminating the risk altogether by taking a different approach. Risk transfer occurs when the project decides to transfer the risk to a third party or by purchasing insurance. Risk mitigation occurs when the project team acts to reduce the probability or impact of the risk. And risk acceptance occurs when the project team decides to acknowledge the risk and not take any action unless the risk occurs. Projects can also have positive risks, which require different response strategies: exploit, enhance, share, and accept. If a positive risk occurs, the project team might choose to exploit the risk by investing in ensuring that it occurs. Enhancing a positive risk is similar, but focuses more on increasing the probability that it will occur. Sharing a positive risk is when the project allocates some or all of the risk to a third party that would be in a better position to capture the value of the risk. And accepting a positive risk means taking advantage of the opportunity it arises, but not actively pursuing it. An important deliverable from the planning process group is the project schedule itself. In addition to the schedule management plan, the actual project schedule will be developed using the processes defined in the project time management knowledge area. These include define activities, sequence activities, estimate activity resources, estimate activity durations, and of course, the develop schedule process. Remember, the PMI does not use the word task in its literature, even though it might be a term you reference frequently at your own workplace. Instead, the terms activity and work packages are used. Work packages are the smallest unit of work within the work breakdown structure, or WBS, and they should be small enough that they can be managed by one person and accurately estimated. An activity is the actual work that needs to be performed to complete a work package. Activities require resources and can be estimated for duration and budget. The activities will form the project schedule that you will manage. Once the project schedule is developed, you can determine its critical path. This is the set of activities that have zero slack, the amount of time an activity can be delayed without delaying the project. Once you understand the critical path, you can look for ways to fast-track the project or crash its schedule. Fast-tracking is performing activities in parallel to save time, while crashing is increasing costs to save time. During the project planning process, it will also be important to determine the expected costs of the project. Based on the cost estimated for the project, it will be possible to determine the project budget. There are two key activities for cost management in the planning group: estimate costs and determine budget. When estimating the cost management plan will be an important reference, as it will provide guidance on how to estimate costs based on a wide range of factors, including currency, types of costs, capital versus expense, and even levels of precision. When developing an estimate of costs, the risk register developed in the Identify Risks process should be leveraged, and one of the techniques used is the reserve analysis. Cost estimates can include a contingency reserve to account for the known unknown risks that might affect project costs. The contingency reserve can be used by the project manager if any of the risks materialize. In addition, a management reserve might also be applied to the project. This reserve is applied in the determined budget process, reflects a reserve for unknown unknowns or completely unanticipated. Remember, there are different ways you can estimate a project: expert, analogous, and parametric. When the project planning process group is complete, the project and its deliverables will be baselined. This is the point where any further changes due to progressive elaboration or risk or issues will require formal change control procedures. The baseline provides an important mechanism for comparison as the project progresses through its life cycle. An example of a question asked in this phrase would be, which of the following is not true regarding subdividing the work in the WBS? A, subdivide until it has meaningful conclusion. B, subdivide until it can be done by a single person. C, subdivide until it cannot be logically subdivided further. Or D, subdivide until it can be accurately estimated. The answer is B, subdivide until it can be done by a single person. All of the others are important properties to be considered while creating a WBS. Please note the question is not asking what is not true regarding subdividing the work in the WBS. Review the inputs, tools and techniques, and output for all of the processes within the planning process group, and ensure you are familiar with any concepts or terms used through the PMBOK. You can leverage the glossary provided in the PMBOK to provide PMI definition for any terms referenced. Prepare for approximately 2 hours by reviewing the key concepts and processes within the executing process group listed on page 61 of the PMBOK. This process group has the most emphasis within the PMP certification exam, with 30% or 60 questions devoted to this group. As might be expected, how a project manager manages a project has substantial influence on its success. Although there are fewer processes in the executing process group than in the planning group, these processes are particularly important to the successful implementation of a project. One of the more important areas is the direct and manage project work process, which ensures that the project is tracking in accordance to its performance goals and implementing approved changes to achieve the project's objectives. It's the last part of that sentence can be tricky for many project managers. During the direct and manage project work process, any approved change request will be applied. However, the actual review and approval of the change request occurs in a separate process group. Monitoring and controlling using the Perform Integrated Change Control process. Make sure you understand that the executing process group is where changes are applied, but their identification occurs in planning, with cost and time estimates, and approved in the monitoring and control process group. The executing process group also contains several key processes within the project human resource management knowledge area, specifically acquire project team, developed project team, and manage project team. It's during the actual project execution that a project manager would assemble the necessary project team and ensure that they are trained and supported throughout the project. Similarly, all of the procurements required for the project, purchasing equipment or software, hiring contractors, etc., all occur in the execution process group. As a project manager, you will also need to be familiar with conflict resolution techniques. There are 5 primary techniques you should be familiar with: withdraw, avoid; collaborate, problem solve, smooth, accommodate, force, direct, and compromise, reconcile. You should also be familiar with different types of authority that project managers can wield to get the best results from their teams: formal, expert, reward, penalty, and referent. Reference authority, it's primarily what project managers will leverage in organizations that have a functional, weak, balanced, or strong matrix. Organizations that have a projectized matrix structure would be able to leverage more formal authority with rewards and penalties. Remember, your team will progress through a series of stages known as forming, storming, norming, performing, and adjourning as part of their development. The executing process group is also when the managed communications and managed stakeholder communications occur within the project. This is an important mechanism for ensuring that stakeholders are not only aware of a project's progress, but can also see their requirements and goals are being met. An example of a question that might be asked would be, with respect to change, what is the most important activity for a project manager to focus on? A, inform project sponsor of the change. B, prevent unnecessary change. C, track and record the change. Or D, do the change. The answer is B, prevent unnecessary change. If you were confused with option D, do the change, remember that the changes are actually done by the project team and not by the project manager. Take approximately 2 more hours to review the key concepts and processes within the monitoring and controlling process group. The PMP exam will have 50 questions, or 25% of all questions devoted to this process group. This process group deals with the activities involved in ensuring that the project is performing to meet its objectives. The project is monitored and evaluated at regular intervals to determine any variances from the plans developed in the project planning process group. As might be expected, almost all knowledge areas have a project management process for monitoring and controlling. Once the schedule is baseline, the project cost management and time management knowledge groups can start leveraging the earned value management, or EVM, techniques to measure project performance against the project baseline as part of the control costs and control schedule processes. This is the part of the exam preparation for most project managers that feels the most challenging. However, all of the calculations and formulas really involve concepts that most of us are familiar with in our day-to-day lives. Remember to refer to Simply Learn's Brain Dump for the PMP to help you with these formulas. Understanding your initial budget, the actual cost to date, and the forecasted cost to complete the project are the key concepts within EVM. Take some time to get comfortable with the Cost Performance Index, or CPI, and Schedule Performance Index, SPI, that is referenced on page 219 of the PMBOK and in the course material in Lesson 7. The number reflects the percentage of the cost or schedule that is expected at that point. Be prepared for a PMP exam question that would look like the following. What does a Schedule Performance Index, or SPI, of 0.67 mean? A, you're ahead of schedule by 33%. B, you are behind schedule by 67%. C, you are progressing at only 67% of the rate originally planned. Or D, you are progressing at only 33% of the rate originally planned. The correct answer is C. Any corrective actions or changes required by the project are reviewed and approved as part of the Perform Integrated Change Control process we discussed previously. Each change follows the same series of steps. Determine that a change is necessary or occurred, evaluate the impact of the change, come up with alternatives, discuss internally, discuss externally. Changes are reviewed by a change advisory board, and once approved, they are applied during the execution process group activities. In addition to managing scope, time, and cost, project managers also need to ensure the quality of project meets the requirements of the stakeholders. The control quality process in the project quality management knowledge area is where the project manager can determine if the appropriate level of quality is present. There are 7 basic quality tools that can be used to assess project quality: control charts, cause and effect diagrams, flow charting, histograms, Pareto diagrams, check sheets, and scatter diagrams. Take the time to review these tools, which are covered in Lesson 8 of the Simply Learn course material and on page 236 of the PMBOK. These tools are part of the Total Quality Management, or TQM, approach developed by Edward Deming, called the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle, or PDCA. You should also be familiar with 6 Sigma and what it represents. 6 Sigma refers to the number of deviations from the mean or average within a population that accounts for 99.9999966% of all variability. This means that any data point outside of 6 Sigma would occur only 3 times in a million. Remember, the project manager is responsible for project quality. You must find the optimal cost of quality, which is the cost conformance, prevention costs, and appraisal costs like testing, and the costs of non-conformance, rework, scrap, or external failure costs like warranties and recalls. The monitoring and controlling process group is also where the project manager will evaluate and manage any risks facing the project. The risk register should be reviewed on a regular basis to assess that the project assumptions are still valid and that the analysis of the risks have not changed. At this point, it might also be necessary for the project manager to leverage the risk contingency reserve that was identified in the estimate cost process in the planning process group. Let's take a look at one more question. The difference between a cost baseline and a cost budget can be best described as A, the contingency reserve, B, the sunk cost, C, project cost estimate, or D, the management reserve. The answer is D, management reserve. And that was a pretty simple question. If you are finding these terms totally new, you should go review lesson number 7 of the Simply Learn PMP preparation course. Now let's review the last project process group. Spend approximately 1 hour reviewing the key concepts and processes of the closing process group. This process group reflects the activities performed to conclude all of the activities to formally complete the project. When the closing processes are completed, the project is officially closed. Remember, a project can be closed for many reasons, including the premature closing of a project if it is canceled or some situation arises where it is no longer viable. There are 2 project processes that occur in this group: close project, or phase, and close procurements. When closing the project, it is important to obtain acceptance by the customer or sponsor, conduct a post-project review, update organizational process assets, document lessons learned, archive relevant project documents, close out procurement activities, and perform team assessments. Watch for tricky questions like, you are a project manager and are in the closing processes of the project. Your customer has been presented with a formal acceptance and sign-off document. They refuse to sign, claiming the product does not meet their expectations. You know that this situation could have been prevented by doing all of the following except A, requesting sign-off at important milestones. B, documenting the customer's refusal to sign. C, documenting the requirements. Or D, performing quality inspections during the process. The correct answer is B. You want to ensure that the customer will sign off during the closing process group, so documenting that they will not sign off will not allow you to close the project. We've successfully reviewed the core content areas of the 5 project management process groups, but it's also worth spending some time on the knowledge areas that are referenced throughout the PMBOK and the course material. Remember, there are 10 project management knowledge areas. These reflect a complete set of concepts, terms, and activities for a project management field or area of specialization. The relationships between the knowledge areas and the process groups are included throughout the Simply Learn training material and on page 61 of the PMBOK. In the form of a table, the 5 process groups are the columns and the 10 knowledge areas are the rows. Each cell contains the 47 processes references within the PMBOK. Project integration management. The processes used to coordinate the various processes across all of the process groups. Project scope management. The processes required to ensure that project includes all of the work required and only the work required to complete the project successfully. Project time management. The processes required to manage the timely completion of the project. Project cost management. The processes involved in planning, estimating, budgeting, financing, funding, and controlling costs so that the project can be completed with its approved budget. Project quality management. The processes that determine quality policies, objectives, and responsibility so that the project will satisfy the needs for which it was undertaken. Project human resource management. The processes that organize, manage, and lead the project team. Project communication management. The processes that are required to ensure timely and appropriate planning, creation, distribution, control, and monitoring of project information. Project risk management. The processes of conducting risk management planning, identification, response planning, and controlling risk on the project. Project procurement management. The processes necessary to purchase or acquire products, services, or results needed from outside the project team. Project stakeholder management. The processes required to identify the people, groups, or organizations that could impact or be impacted by the project. Tricky questions on the PMP certification exam include very specific language in the questions. Be sure to read each question very carefully and pay close attention to the specific words used. The PMP is as much about defining a common language for project management as it is about best practices. So you need to spend enough time reviewing the material to naturally understand PMP terminology. There are also cases where multiple answers seem to be correct. In this case, it is important to choose the answer that answers the question as specifically as possible, and that also addresses all aspects of the question. If an answer is correct, but only speaks to part of the question, there may be a more comprehensive answer. It's also important to remember the distinction between an input, tool, and technique, and an output. An example of this type of question would be, timing is an important factor with the foundation exam. Because there are 200 questions to answer in 4 hours, it is important not to spend too much time on each question. If you are unsure about the answer to a question, spend a short time on it and then move on and return to that question later if time permits. However, ensure you answer every question on the exam. There is no penalty for an incorrect answer, so focus on narrowing the answers down and select the best answer from your perspective.